My name is Dara Voss. I am 29 years old. And the first line of my first published book, the line that appears before the table of contents, before the acknowledgments, before any of the pages that took me for years to write, is my mother's voice. Not a tribute. Not a thank you. Her exact words, printed in italics on an otherwise blank page, attributed to no one. I don't understand why you need my validation. You always needed so much from people. She said it to me on a Tuesday evening in February of 2021, standing in the kitchen of the house I grew up in, while I was telling her that a small literary press in Portland had expressed interest in the manuscript I had been working on since I was 25. She said it without cruelty. That was the part one could never fully resolve. She said it the way you state a weather observation. Flat. Informational. As if she were simply naming something that had always been true and was only now relevant to name. I drove home that night in silence. I sat in my car in my own parking lot for 11 minutes before I could make myself go inside. And I thought about that sentence, the specific shape of it, the specific weight of it, and I understood in the quiet of a February parking lot at 9:47 p.m. that I was going to use it. I didn't know exactly how yet, but I knew I was going to use it. This is how that happened. My mother's name is Renata Voss. She is 58 years old. She taught high school English literature for 22 years, a fact that I've spent considerable time sitting with, because there is a specific irony in being told by a woman who taught books for a living that your need to write one was a symptom of emotional deficiency rather than a legitimate creative impulse. She is not a cruel woman. I want to establish that early and mean it, because the story I am telling is not a story about a monster. My mother is intelligent, competent, occasionally funny, deeply invested in her own sense of herself as a reasonable person, and almost constitutionally unable to receive anything that reads to her as need without recoiling from it slightly, as if need were a communicable condition she had spent her entire adult life being careful not to catch. I am an only child. My father, Edmund Voss, left when I was 7, not dramatically, not with violence or crisis, but in the slow particular way of a man who had wanted a different life and eventually went to find it. He moved to British Columbia. He remarried in 2004. He sends birthday cards consistently and has done so every year without fail, which I credit him for, and which also means we have had a birthday card relationship for 22 years and nothing deeper. My mother raised me alone, which she did well, and which also meant that for the formative years of my life the primary relationship in my world was the one between her and me, and whatever shape that relationship had, I had no other close template to measure it against. The shape it had was this. My mother was present, capable, and reliable in all practical senses, and emotionally she maintained a distance that felt, when I was young, like dignity and felt, as I got older, like something more complicated. She did not say, "I love you" easily. She expressed approval through the absence of criticism. She fed me, clothed me, attended every school event, drove me to every appointment, and communicated her care through an unbroken record of functional consistency. What she did not do, what I understood only gradually, the way you understand things that are absences rather than presences, was witness me. She was there for the facts of my life, but not for the feeling of it. And for a child who processed the world primarily through language and story and the need to be heard, that specific gap was the one that mattered most. I started writing when I was 9. Not stories at first, journals mostly, which I kept with the seriousness of someone who understood even then that the written record was more reliable than the spoken one. By 12 I was writing fiction, long looping narratives that I printed out and left on the kitchen table, hoping. My mother read them, occasionally. She would note grammatical precision or flag a word choice she found imprecise. She never said anything about what the stories were about or how they made her feel, because talking about feelings was not a mode she operated in easily, and I learned to receive her grammatical notes as the closest available approximation of engagement and be grateful for them. By the time I was in my mid-20s and working on the manuscript that would eventually become my book, a collection of linked essays about language, inheritance, and the particular way we use words to both communicate and conceal, I had long since stopped expecting my mother to be a witness to my work in the way I had needed as a child. What I had not stopped expecting, I think, was that she would be present for the largest moments. that the accumulated weight of 22 years of birthday cards and functional consistency would have created something in her that would show up when something real happened.
I was wrong about that.
But I didn't understand how wrong until February 2021. The call from Meridian Press came on a Thursday morning, January 28, 2021, at 10:14 a.m. The acquiring editor's name was Sophie Hale. She had read the manuscript, all of it, she said, in 2 sittings, and she believed in it with a specificity and a warmth that I had not prepared myself to receive. I sat at my desk in my apartment in Portland and listened to her describe my own work back to me with such accuracy that I had to press my palm flat against the desk surface to feel something solid while she spoke. I called my best friend Meredith immediately after. I called my former thesis advisor, Professor Lynn Bauer, who had supervised the early drafts of the essays in 2018 and 2019 and who responded with a 2-sentence email at 6:30 that evening that I have saved and read many times since. I called my Aunt Clara, who is my mother's younger sister and who has always responded to my work with a simplicity and a generosity that I found, growing up, a useful corrective to the temperature in my mother's house. I did not call my mother that day. I drove to her house the following Tuesday evening instead. I wanted to tell her in person. I wanted to watch her face. It was 6:52 p.m. when I arrived. She was in the kitchen making tea. I sat at the kitchen table, the same table where I had placed printed stories as a child, and waited, and I told her that my manuscript had been accepted for publication by a small but well-regarded literary press, and that the book would be coming out the following year, and that the acquiring editor had described the work in terms that I still found slightly surreal. My mother set down her mug. She looked at me with an expression I can describe only as careful, the expression of someone deciding how much of what they actually think to give you. Then she said, "That's good news. What kind of advance are they offering?" I told her the advance was modest, $7,400, which was standard for a debut literary essay collection at a small press, and which I had known going in. She nodded. She said, "So you'll still need the day job?" I said yes, I would still need the day job. She made a sound that was not quite dismissal and not quite acceptance, something in between, the sound of a woman filing information in a category she had already designated. I sat at that kitchen table for another 40 minutes. I told her about Sophie Hale. I told her what Professor Bauer had said. I told her the title of the collection and the general shape of the essays and the particular piece I was most uncertain about and most proud of simultaneously. My mother listened, refilled her tea, asked 2 clarifying questions of a logistical nature, and said, as I was putting on my coat to leave, "I hope it does well for you." I drove home at 8:31 p.m. The night was very cold. I remember the specific quality of the cold, the way it had a clarity to it that felt almost surgical. I sat in my parking lot, and I thought about what I had wanted from that conversation and what I had received and the distance between those 2 things, and I cried for approximately 7 minutes in a way that felt less like grief and more like a precise and accurate acknowledgement of a gap that I had been refusing to measure directly for most of my adult life. Then I went inside. I made tea. I opened the manuscript. I went back to work. Before I tell you what happened next with the book, and I will tell you in full, I want to stop and ask you something. Where are you right now as you're listening to this? Is the light changing outside your window, the way it does in the late part of the day when the afternoon starts its slow negotiation with the evening? I think about the people who hear this story in their own kitchens, their own cars, their own parking lots at night, people who know exactly what I mean when I say that the 40 minutes I sat at that table was one of the loneliest I have ever spent, in a house that was full of furniture and warmth and the smell of tea and another human being. If that particular kind of loneliness is familiar to you, stay with me. The next part is important. The remark happened 3 years before all of this. In February of 2018, when I was 23 and had just submitted the first real draft of the first essay in the collection to Professor Bauer for workshop feedback. I was at my mother's house for the weekend. I had told her what I was working on, carefully, in the way I had learned to introduce my work to her, with enough context to make it comprehensible and not so much enthusiasm that it read as a demand for a response she wasn't capable of giving. She listened. She asked if this was for a class or for something else. I said it was for something else that I was trying to build toward a manuscript that I believed I had something real to say, and that I was finding the essay form adequate to saying it. I said the word believe about my own work, and I saw something cross her face as I said it. Not mockery, not contempt, just a slight readjustment, like someone recalibrating the distance between themselves and a heat source. She said, "I don't understand why you need my validation. You always needed so much from people." The room went entirely quiet. I had not asked for her validation. I had told her about something I was working on. The gap between those two things, between telling someone about your life and demanding their approval of it, was one I had apparently been unable to make visible to her, and the sentence suggested it had always been invisible to her, and that the invisibility was not new information. I said, "I wasn't asking for validation. I was just telling you what I'm doing." She said, "I know. I'm just saying." And that was it. The conversation moved on. I stayed through Sunday. I drove home. I did not cry about it. I wrote it down in my journal at 11:03 p.m. that night, verbatim, because I had learned early that the written record was more reliable than the spoken one, and that some sentences need to be captured before the mind starts softening them. I kept working on the manuscript. I kept not showing it to her. I submitted the full collection to Professor Bauer's advanced workshop in September of 2019. I revised through 2020. I sent it to Meridian Press in November of 2020. And through all of it, my mother's sentence sat in my chest like a splinter, not disabling, not constantly present, but there, in that particular way of things that have worked their way in at the wrong angle and that the body, rather than expelling, simply learns to accommodate. The dedication came to me in March of 2021, 6 weeks after the acquisition call, sitting at my kitchen table with the final manuscript file open in front of me. I had been staring at the dedication page, blank, a placeholder, the cursor blinking, for the better part of an hour. I had considered the usual forms. I had considered dedicating it to Meredith, who had read every draft, to Professor Bauer, who had shaped the work more than anyone, to my Aunt Clara, who had always shown up. And then I thought about the epigraph. The collection is, at its structural core, about the way inherited language shapes the self, about the sentences we receive from the people who raise us, and the way those sentences become architecture, become the walls we live inside without always knowing we chose them. The work had been built, in ways I had not fully articulated even to myself, around that February sentence. Not around bitterness. Around the question the sentence had lodged in me: what does it mean to need to be heard, and why is that need treated, in certain families, as a character flaw rather than a human condition? My mother's exact words as the epigraph. Unattributed. Italicized. Set on the otherwise empty dedication page, where the tribute to a person usually goes. I stared at it on the screen for a long time. I felt something that was not quite satisfaction and not quite sorrow. Something in the register of completion, the way a sentence that has been building toward its final clause finally lands. I saved the file. I opened my email. I wrote a short message to my mother, 4 sentences, telling her that the manuscript had a finalized epigraph and that I wanted her to see it before publication. I attached the dedication page as a PDF. I sent it at 9:22 p.m. on March 14, 2021. I watched the email. Not constantly. I was not that person, or I tried not to be. But I checked. Over the following days, and then the following weeks. The email client I used at the time had read receipts enabled by default. The message remained unread. 1 week. 2 weeks. By the 4th week, I understood she was not going to open it. I did not know if she was avoiding it deliberately or simply hadn't noticed it in the volume of her inbox. I found, after sitting with both possibilities for some time, that the distinction between them was less significant than I had expected. The result was the same. The dedication page would remain what it was, and she would encounter it on publication day, or whenever she first opened the book, in whatever circumstances that occurred, and the page would say what it said. I emailed Sophie Hale at Meridian Press on April 9th confirming the dedication and epigraph as final. Sophie wrote back at 2:47 p.m. the same day, "This is an extraordinary choice. I want you to know I think it's the most honest page in the book. I read that sentence 4 times and filed it carefully in a folder I had labeled, perhaps optimistically, Things to Keep. Something inside me loosened that had been pulled tight for years in the months between that email and publication day. Not all at once. Gradually, the way light changes in a room as the season shifts, so incrementally that you don't notice until one afternoon you look up and realize it's different than it was. I was not waiting for my mother to respond anymore. I had stopped waiting without making a decision to stop. It had happened on its own, the way the body sometimes resolves things the mind has been circling. I started sleeping better. I worked on the author notes. I had a phone call with Sophie on May 7th to discuss the advance reading copy distribution, and another on June 14th to review the cover design. The cover was a close photograph of a typewriter key, specifically the letter I, which had been Sophie's idea and which I found, when I first saw the mock-up, so precisely right that I laughed alone in my apartment at 4:18 p.m. on a Thursday afternoon in the particular way you laugh, when something is more accurate than you expected. I sent a copy of the advance review edition to Meredith in late June. I sent one to Professor Bauer. I sent one to my Aunt Clara, who called me within 48 hours and talked for 50 minutes and cried twice. I did not send one to my mother. I had not decided not to, or rather I had decided, but without ceremony, the way you decide to stop buying something you no longer need simply by not buying it. The publication date was set for September 14th, 2021. The book tour was small. Meridian Press was a small press, but Sophie had arranged readings in Portland, Seattle, and San Francisco, and she had submitted the collection for consideration for 2 regional literary prizes. The Literary Festival invitation arrived in February of 2022, the Pacific Northwest Literary Gathering in April, which was a mid-sized annual event in Seattle that I had attended as an audience member twice in my 20s, and that had the kind of modest prestige that matters in literary circles without mattering much anywhere else. The interview was the last event of the Saturday afternoon programming block, April 23, 2022, at 3:15 p.m. The journalist conducting it was a woman named Alicia Farrand, who wrote a books column for a regional culture publication with a national digital audience. I had spoken with her briefly at a reception the evening before. She was precise, genuinely curious, and had read the book, truly read it, the kind of reading that leaves fingerprints in the text that a writer can see in the questions. We sat in 2 chairs on a small raised platform in the main programming tent. There were perhaps 230 people in the audience. I remember that detail because I counted the rows while Alicia was introduced, which is a thing I do when I am managing nerves, count something innumerable, hold the number in my mind like ballast. The conversation went for 35 minutes. We talked about the structure of the collection. We talked about the essay as a form. We talked about the particular essay, the third in the collection, titled Validation, which had generated the most response from early readers and which was, in its essence, a meditation on the sentence my mother had said to me in February of 2018 and everything it had opened up. Alicia had asked me, before the event, whether I was comfortable discussing the personal origins of the epigraph if it came up. I had said yes. It came up at 3:47 p.m. She said, "The epigraph is your mother's voice. You've confirmed that in other interviews. But you've never said whether she knows what you did with what she said. Does she?" I said, "She has a copy of the book. I imagine she does now." The audience laughed, not at cruelty, at recognition. The specific knowing laugh of people who have had their own version of a sentence that lived in their chests like a splinter. Alicia said, "Have you spoken to her about it?" I said, "We haven't spoken about the book directly now." She paused. She said, "Does that feel like a boundary or like unfinished business?" I looked at the audience for a moment. 230 faces. The afternoon light coming through the tent fabric at an angle that made everything look slightly golden, the way late April light does in the Pacific Northwest when the rain clears. I said, "I think it feels like accuracy. I wrote the book I needed to write. The epigraph says what it needed to say. Whether we talk about it is a different question, and one I've decided I'm not responsible for initiating." Alicia nodded. She said, "That's the most honest thing anyone has said on this stage all weekend." The audience applauded. The video clip, someone in the audience had been recording on a phone, a clean recording, steady, was posted to a literary Instagram account by 5:30 p.m. By 7 o'clock it had been shared 340 times. By the following morning, it had been embedded in 2 National Book Review publications and a literary culture newsletter with 80,000 subscribers. I was in my hotel room at 6:47 p.m., washing my face, when my phone buzzed with a text from my Aunt Clara. "Your mother just called me. She's been getting calls from people she doesn't know. She sounded confused and upset. I think you should know." I looked at my phone for a long time. I set it face down on the bathroom counter. I finished washing my face. I patted my face dry with a hotel towel. Then I sat on the edge of the bed and allowed myself 2 full minutes to simply sit with the feeling, not triumph, not guilt, something between the two that didn't have a cleaner name than honest. My mother called me at 8:13 p.m. I let it ring. She called again at 8:41 p.m. I let it ring. At 9:06 p.m., she sent a text. "Dara, I need to talk to you. People are calling me about an interview. I don't understand what is happening." I read it. I put my phone on the nightstand. I ordered room service, a bowl of soup, which arrived at 9:47 p.m. and which I ate slowly, looking out the hotel window at the Seattle skyline and the dark water of the Sound beyond it. I thought about the February kitchen. I thought about the sentence. I thought about the 40 minutes at the kitchen table in January 2021, and the unread email and the dedication page, and the 4 years the manuscript had taken, and the 22 years before that. I thought, I have already said what I needed to say. It is in the book. It is on the first page of the book. Anyone who wants to understand what I have to say about this can read that page, and then the 243 pages that follow it, and then they will understand more than I could convey in any phone call. I slept at 11:38 p.m. I slept well. My phone registered 27 missed calls from my mother between 8:13 p.m. on the night of the festival and 9 a.m. the following morning, April 24th. There were 11 voicemails, which I did not listen to until 3 days later, and which ranged in register from confused to indignant to, in the final 3, something that I can only describe as frightened, the voice of a woman realizing that a narrative about her had left her house and was moving through the world without her permission or her participation. She told people in the days that followed, I know this because 3 separate people told me, independently over the course of the next 2 weeks, that she had always believed in me, that she had always known the book would be something, that the epigraph was a private moment between a mother and a daughter that had been taken out of context by a journalist asking leading questions. I did not correct any of these characterizations publicly. I did not post about it. I did not give additional interviews about my mother specifically. What I did was respond, eventually, to her emails. She had shifted to email after I didn't answer the calls, with a single message sent on April 29th at 11:20 a.m., 3 paragraphs long. The first paragraph said that I was glad the book was finding readers. The second paragraph said that the epigraph was exactly what it appeared to be, and that I had sent her the dedication page 6 weeks before publication, and that the email remained unread in her inbox if she wanted to verify the date. The third paragraph said that I loved her, that I was not interested in a public dispute, and that when she was ready to talk about the book honestly rather than defensively, I would be available for that conversation. She did not respond for 11 days. When she did, on May 10th at 7:34 p.m., she wrote 3 sentences. The first acknowledged receiving my email. The second said that she had found my early drafts of essays difficult to read and had not known how to tell me that. The third said that she wished she had handled things differently. It was not an apology. It was the closest approximation of one that I believe my mother has available to her. I sat with it for a long time, 2 evenings at my kitchen table with a cup of tea, before I wrote back. What I wrote back was brief. I said that I understood. I said that the book had been written with love as much as with anything else, even if the love was complicated, and that I hoped she could eventually read it that way. I pressed send at 9:11 p.m. on a Wednesday evening. Then I closed my laptop and walked to the window and stood there for a while, watching the rain on the street below, the particular Portland rain that is more mist than rain, that softens the edges of the streetlights until the whole street looks like it exists slightly outside of time. My mother and I speak now. Not often. Not with the ease that I sometimes see between mothers and daughters, and that I have made a quiet peace with not having. We speak on birthdays and at Christmas, and occasionally in between when something warrants it. The conversations are careful. They are more honest than they used to be, which is something. They are not the conversations I spent 22 years hoping to have, which is also something, a different something, one that requires its own kind of acknowledgement. The book won a regional prize in November of 2022. The prize was called the Northwest Book Award for Literary Nonfiction. Sophie Hale called me at 10:08 a.m. on a Tuesday morning in November to tell me before the announcement went public, and I sat at my desk in Portland and let the news arrive in the quiet, the way the best news arrives, not shouting, just present, like something that had been true for a while finally being said out loud. My mother sent me a card. It arrived 4 days after the announcement. On the front was a photograph of autumn trees. Inside, in her handwriting, she had written, "I am proud of you." I know that is something I should have said more. 9 words of acknowledgement and 5 words of acknowledgement that the acknowledgement was late. 14 words total. I put the card on my bookshelf next to the copy of the book. I stood there for a moment looking at both of them. Then I went to make coffee. There is something I have come to understand about language, about the sentences we receive and the sentences we make from them, that I could not have articulated when I was 23 sitting at a kitchen table hearing my mother tell me I needed too much. The sentences that damage us most are rarely the ones spoken in cruelty. They are the ones spoken in calm, informational tones by people who believe they are simply describing reality rather than constructing it. Those sentences are the hardest to argue with, the hardest to put down, and if you are lucky and stubborn and have access to a blank page, sometimes the most generative. I did not write that book to punish my mother. I wrote it because the question her sentence opened in me was a real question, and the essay form was adequate to exploring it, and I had for years and a room of my own, and nothing to prove to anyone except the work itself. The epigraph was not revenge. It was precision. There is a difference, and the difference matters, though I understand why from the outside they can look the same. Research in narrative psychology suggests that the stories we construct about our formative experiences, the meaning we make from the sentences we were given, are among the strongest determinants of our psychological resilience and our sense of self-authorship. I did not know that framework when I was writing. I knew only that the sentence had to go somewhere and that the page was the right place for it, and that making something from it was more useful than carrying it. If you were in Dara's position, if you had built your first book around a sentence your mother said to wound you, sent her the dedication 6 weeks before publication, and watched the email go unread, would you have removed the epigraph before publication? Or would you have left it exactly where you put it and let the book say what the book needed to say? I'm not here to tell you which answer is right. I'm here to tell you that the blank dedication page is never actually blank. It is always waiting for the truest sentence you have. This story is a work of creative fiction inspired by real emotional experiences shared online. Names, identifying details, and specific events have been changed or composited for privacy and narrative purposes. This channel does not provide legal, financial, or psychological advice.